Crime Time here on Court TV, where we take a look at criminal stories from around the nation and then get some perspective and insight from our own experts who we bring in. Tonight, joining us, retired police lieutenant and host of Blue Lives Radio, Randy Sutton. Randy has over 3 decades of experience in law enforcement. He served in the Princeton, New Jersey PD, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. He's a spokesman for the American Council on Public Safety, and he helps wounded officers and their families through his foundation, The Wounded Blue. Also with us, former police officer and Sheriff's Deputy Joe Ested. Joe's been a corrections officer, police officer, investigator, Sheriff's Deputy. He was elected Vice President of the Police Union and served in Afghanistan as a police advisor and instructor for Afghanistan Police Training Program. He's also the author of the book, Police Brutality Matters. Joe, Randy, great to have you both here. Let's get right to our first story from KMTV in Omaha. Ultimate Fighter stops a break-in.
UFC star Anthony Lionheart Smith has fought the best fighters around the world, but his bout over the weekend was the most important of his life. Get out! Get out now! An intruder inside his West Omaha home at 4 in the morning.
He was just screaming at the top of his lungs over and over and over.
A neighbor's surveillance video shows the suspect running down the street. Smith accidentally left his garage door open. The suspect stops and runs right in.
I think he was trying to scare me, but he was still walking towards me. So I just engaged him as fast as I could. You know, I got 3 daughters, I got a wife, I got a mother-in-law that I'm responsible for. So at nighttime, usually it's because people want to do something to you. They want to hurt you. They have something, whether it's a weapon, a gun, a knife, a bat. You know, so I'm expecting he has something, and I don't. So I just needed to get to him and honestly do as much damage as I could before I was going to succumb to whatever he had.
The Douglas County Sheriff's Office cites 21-year-old Luke Haberman with misdemeanor trespassing. He's since been released from the hospital. Sheriffs are also investigating his actions caught on surveillance, where he's apparently trying to break into cars. This Ring video shows the suspect's state of mind when he allegedly got into another neighbor's home before Smith's. Also, he's seen violently yelling throughout the neighborhood. Douglas County Sheriff's Office Captain Wayne Hudson says he was under the influence of some substance.
There is probably some evidence at the scene that we found. Some of his mannerisms, the way he was, tells that he's on something or was on something.
So he didn't feel like he was human. It was odd. He wasn't responding the way that typically people do, whether it's submissions or pain or strikes. He didn't respond to anything.
It's your own home. I mean, you can defend yourself in your own home. In this situation here, the individual is professionally trained to subdue individuals. So, based on what he does for a sport,
you get your sense of security in your own home taken away when someone just comes in and violates that.
So my question, first question is, how do police approach someone who is in this state of mind? This was a UFC fighter who fought for the World Championship, and he had difficulty doing damage on this guy because of whatever he was taking or his state of mind. Randy, how do police approach someone like that?
Well, first thing, Vinny, I want to say that my favorite quote from that story was, the suspect was just released from the hospital. That's my favorite quote here, because he chose the wrong man's house to break into. And the reality is this, that under the influence of a number of different controlled substances, law enforcement officers are facing extreme danger. There are substances out there where the individual will feel no pain, no matter what you do to subdue him. So this is an exceedingly dangerous situation. And the family, as he pointed out, the family is playing the what if game right now. That is, what if Mr. Smith was not there? This is a terrible issue for them, because they are now they feel like they were violated in their own home, and they were.
Joe, this UFC fighter, I mean, he's the real deal. He's not like some amateur. No, this is a professional. This is what he does for a living. And he was saying the guy was not responding. Like, if that guy punched me once, I'm done. I'm screaming. I'm running away like a little baby, right? he couldn't stop him. He almost couldn't stop. He was able to subdue him, thank goodness. So a police officer, not a UFC fighter, what do you do?
Yeah, I'm so glad. Everybody, like Rainey said, would think that he picked the wrong house. I'm just the total opposite. I think he picked the right house. He picked a house that someone was able to subdue him and actually hold him until law enforcement got there. Because, like Rainey said, this is a dangerous situation. When you come in contact with somebody high on drugs, they sometimes possess strength that was way beyond the average person. Sometimes it'll take 4 to 5 guys to wrestle somebody down to the ground and actually place them into custody. So I'm actually glad that he was able to actually pick this house with a UFC fighter, because he was terrorizing that whole neighborhood. So I'm glad if he had to pick a house, he picked the house that the actual UFC fighter was there and was able to put this guy into custody and hold him until the police arrived.
Our next story comes from KXLF in Butte, Montana. Anti-Semitic flyers distributed in the neighborhood.
The message is clear.
Help us help you. But if you don't, and you're going to force us, we're going to take action.
Action against boaters not following the rules in Pinellas County. Sheriff Bob Galtieri shared chopper video of boats lined up one by one last Saturday. He says people may not have known about the FWC order requiring boats to stay 50 feet apart with no more than 10 people on board. The problem's so bad off Gandy Boulevard, the sheriff himself shut the beach down. Deputies now will patrol that area to keep people out.
It was a disaster out there. There was beer cans flying everywhere, and people were partying. They were not adhering to any of this. They were all over each other, and it was just a mess out there.
After the sheriff's office got out to enforce the order, things got better. But now the pressure is on for folks to follow the rules or risk having boat ramps like this close.
It would definitely be a bummer.
Boaters we spoke to don't want to see crowded ramps again. Frustration with rule breakers shared across the board.
If we can all take some personal responsibility, do what we're supposed to do, follow the guidelines, and keep the boat ramps and the waterways open.
County officials explained they don't want to close anything, but if guidelines aren't followed, they'll need to reevaluate.
All right, that's actually from WFTS down in Tampa. And the question I have is, what are the biggest challenges in trying to get folks to follow these guidelines? We've covered a couple stories with social distancing, you know, in neighborhoods, in houses, parties, et cetera. Now you're talking about boats, Joe, boats. How are you going to get folks to comply with this now? What's the best way to do that type of policing?
Yeah, I mean, officers need to be held to a higher standard, and that requires having a lot of restraint, just period. But under the conditions that we're having now with this pandemic, I mean, you need to have extra restraint, because, you know, you got people in a free society that's not used to all of these restraints. So it's going to require an officer with a lot of patience, a lot of understanding, and constantly re-innovating the need to actually be quarantined, be safe, respect the 6 feet distancing, because we're trying to get a hold of this, and you have to relay that message to the general public, because a lot of times the general public don't understand us as law enforcement on what we need to do. But having an understanding of why we need to have these restraints at this moment, it's very vital for an officer and the officers to go out there and communicate constantly. The communication has to be vital, has to be important.
Yeah, everybody is so tense right now. We're in a whole new world here, Randy. You know, the community, but police now. And police have this added responsibility, which is so different than anything they've ever done before.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Now, this is not a situation that is isolated to Pinellas County. I can tell you this from talking to some officers down in Florida, that this has been happening in a number of different places. And each sheriff is reacting a little bit differently. In certain areas, they are actually shutting down all boating, which, of course, you know, this is the old adage. It only takes a couple bad apples to spoil it, because what's happening is the folks that want to just enjoy being out in the water by themselves. They're not harming anyone. They're adhering to the social distancing, but it gets ruined by those that couldn't care less about others. Just as, you know, we saw the same issue with the spring break issue. But the officers are being tasked with things that, are very unusual for law enforcement. So this is tenuous ground for sure.
All right, when we come back, more crime time. We're going to get to that story involving those anti-Semitic flyers that were distributed out in Montana. Welcome back to our Crime Time segment. We take a look at criminal stories from around the nation and get some insight from our experts. Still with us, Randy Sutton, retired police lieutenant, also the host of Blue Lives Radio, and Joe Ested, former police officer, former sheriff's deputy. Let's get to that story from Butte, Montana. KXLF, anti-Semitic flyers distributed in the neighborhood.
Hundreds of flyers with an anti-Semitic message were distributed on car windshields and front porches of homes in the Floral Park neighborhood in Butte. It was late yesterday or early this morning. Police say the message of hate could be considered intimidation or another crime.
Obviously, anybody who's out distributing those at night would be obviously in violation of the governor's order for essential travel only. So that we're looking at a number of crimes that were committed by this person or persons. Also, there is federal hate crimes that could come into place.
Police are now asking for video surveillance footage from anyone in the neighborhood that might help to identify the suspect.
All right, so my question is pretty simple. When does hate speech become a police matter? Because, you know, hate speech isn't on its own necessarily illegal. I mean, I know there's a generation now that thinks hate speech is illegal because you can't do it on Facebook or YouTube or anywhere else, but it's still protected by the Constitution. So when does it turn into a police matter, Randy?
You know, this is a very disturbing story to me. When an individual or a group, because this is very possibly not just one person doing this, feels that it's okay to go out and spread messages of hate. This is very disturbing on a whole bunch of different levels. You know, the public information officer, or the sheriff that was discussing this was talking about violating the governor's rules, but this is far deeper than that. Now, you're right about protected speech. There is still, you know, a constitutional amendment that it's a very fine line between a criminal activity and simply something that is abhorrent to you know the people. But if you are trying to provoke some type of criminal activity, if you're trying to intimidate people because of their race or their creed or their color, there are a lot of federal statutes that cover that. And an individual that feels that they can go out and try and stir up hate, they need to be dealt with on one level or another.
Joe Ested,
Sir.
When does this become a police matter, and how do you approach all of this? Like, what's the angle?
See, I mean, I like what the police department is doing when they start talking about video cameras going to the neighbors, because we're in a day and age where everybody has a door camera, a cell phone, home video surveillance, actually going out and door to door knocking and seeing the time frame of when when the offense actually occurs. So when we start talking about hate crimes, when we start talking about promoting violence and promoting criminal activity, that's when we start talking about criminal elements. That action meets a criminal element, and that's when we need to pursue criminal charges. So, I mean, I like the direction that the police department is going when it comes down to how they're pursuing it. And when you start talking about the First Amendment, yes, we have a lot of leeway when it comes down to what we say, but when the language becomes violent and criminal in nature, then it becomes a criminal charge.
Next story from KRIS in Corpus Christi, Texas. Police to test old sexual assault kits.
Since last year, state law requires that all kits be tested within 90 days at a DPS lab. But that leaves no time to test older kits. That's why the council wants to test some of CCPD's backlog at a private lab. Of the nearly 250 untested kits Corpus Christi police still have in evidence, nearly half will be headed to the lab.
We had about 247 cases left over of the actual scene exams. And so what we had to do was go through each one of them and see if it met the statute.
117 kits, all from between 2005 and 2011, met the criteria of a complete kit and a filed complaint. Tuesday, the council votes to approve a little more than $93,000 to test those kits at a private lab.
We already have those relationships with different labs, and they do have much quicker turnaround because they don't have the volume that DPS has.
Victims advocates celebrate the move.
Spending the money to test these kits, it would really set a precedent that survivors are the priority for our community.
Nora Bransom, a community educator with the Purple Door, says about 91% of assaults in Texas aren't reported. Bransom believes these tests will give survivors hope. She hopes they'll also bring closure for others.
If we're able to get DNA from these kits, we could have the potential to prevent so much more of this from happening to others.
We really would suspect to see something is in a not necessarily clearing those cases as much as future cases.
Victims advocate groups like the Purple Door are encouraged. They believe if these tests lead to convictions, then other victims will be willing to report their assaults.
Why wouldn't you test every kit? I don't understand this part. I mean, should I be shocked here, Joe, that they're doing sex assault kits and then not testing them? And there's a backlog, 250 of them in one town. That's just Corpus Christi. I mean, why wouldn't you test every kit, like when it happens, to try to catch the suspect?
Vinny, you're absolutely right. You should be shocked. And it sounds like, listening to the story, that it seems like it's a financial issue. We should not be compromising these kits being tested because we can't afford to pay for it. I mean, we need to find a way to pay for it because it makes no sense. You got victims, you got, DNA testing is extremely important. And, and you're talking about victims that won't see a true justice because a kit won't get tested. There's no excuse for that. There's no excuse at all. And you're absolutely right, Vinny. You're in shock, and you have every right to be. So these kits should be tested, 100%.
Randy, it's not, and you're solving one crime. You could be preventing a whole bunch of future women from being victimized here.
This story really angers me, Vinny. I got to tell you, and I wish I could tell you that this is a news story, but it's not. This has been pervasive throughout the country. You're talking about one city, Corpus Christi, but around the country, there's over 100,000, and that is a astounding number of rape kits that have not been tested. Now, there's a lot of issues here, a lot of issues, but the most one is the human issue. Think of during my police career, sexual assault is one of those crimes that sticks with you because it is a crime that affects much more than just one victim. It affects the entire family. It is a despicable crime. And if law enforcement doesn't take this issue seriously and put forth the effort and the funds to investigate these crimes thoroughly, then everybody gets hurt. And this is one of those things that I wish I could tell you was an isolated experience. It is not. It is around the country.
Randy Sutton, Joe Ested, great to have you. Great to have your expertise on our program. Please come back. And still ahead, folks.